He's written over 200 books and has raised successful kids at the same time. It is renowned author Jerry Jenkins in episode 141 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, Jerry Jenkins. First off, Jerry, you've written over 200 books. You've got a new one out that parallels the latest season of The Chosen. It's called Not My Will. We'll talk about that some more. And, of course, the success of your son, who is the brain behind The Chosen, too. But let's start here. What's the biggest challenge that you see men face today, and how do we overcome it?
Well, you know, I've been around many decades, and I've found that there's one thing that really never changes with men, unfortunately. But I think the biggest challenge is spending time with your kids when they're growing up. I remember before, Dallas is our eldest of three grown sons. And before he was even born, I was in my early 20s. I was working for a Sunday school paper company and interviewing 5 different men, all about twice my age at that time, on totally disparate subjects, different articles. But at one point in each of the interviews, I asked them, what regrets do you have at this stage of your life? And every one of them said the same thing. I wish I'd spent more time with my kids when they're growing up. And I remember going home and telling Diana, somebody's clearly trying to tell me something. And if I have that same regret at that same age, I'll be without excuse. And so we set a policy that I was working, full-time then and writing on the side. And I just set a policy that when kids came along, I would do no writing and no work from the office from the time I got home from work until the time the kids went to bed. Or sometimes they put something in their milk so they could go to bed. But I did that religiously. And, I know there aren't any guarantees. I know there are many parents who are really devout about this and still have prodigals and rebels. But in our case, that didn't happen. And all 3 of our kids grew up to love the Lord and go to church and be active in their faith. And I really think that was part of the secret. But there's no shortcut for that. People really do regret it if they don't do it.
And such a powerful thing to think about. And I know we'll talk about your son and your journey with him. But I would like to also just talk about that right now of growing up, Dallas being your oldest. What did it look like growing as he grew up? Did you see this creative spark in him? Did you inspire it? Did you foster it? That now we are at this point of season 5 of The Chosen.
I would love to take credit for it, but he did grow up. My wife and I see him on television or on the screen, and we say, "Was this kid raised by wolves? When did this happen?" But actually, I thought from day one that this was a brilliant child, and he really was. He was ahead of the game in IQ and in grades and all that type of thing. He was very creative, very emotional, very cuddly. He was a great kid. And, when I spent that time, from the time I get home from work to the time he went to bed, with him, it was all talking. He was a talker. Now, our middle child was quiet, and our third is a little combination of both. But with Dallas, he talked, he had questions. And, he grew up in the home of a storyteller. There's no question about that. I didn't push him to become a writer or anything, but when he was a young teen, I started taking him to movies, and really good movies. And when he saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and saw Jack Nicholson in that scene where they prohibit him from having the TV on in the home for these troubled men. And so he pretends it's on, and he narrates a World Series game. He talks about a hit and a catch and a throw and a slide and all that stuff. And Dallas was just agog. He watched that and he said, "Dad, I don't know what that is, but that's what I want to do." And so from that point on, I just encouraged him in that. Early in his career, after he got out of college, he was a theater major in college, but then he started working for little film companies and stuff. And I financed his movies. We had the means because of Left Behind at that time. And, people will, sometimes say, well, it was nepotism or he had breaks that other people didn't have. Yeah, he had some means that other people may not have had, but that doesn't make it work. You have to be talented and you have to do great work. And he did that. And I've always thought everything he did was brilliant. With The Chosen, I was right. And and The Chosen was his alone. I didn't finance that. And so when that thing took off, I feel like I sort of pressed my nose up against the glass and asked if I could play too. And he was happy to let me write a novel for each season of The Chosen. So it's been a great ride.
Yeah, we'll jump into that in just a minute, but let's go back to, again, Left Behind. What an iconic series. And as a writer, talk about your journey of writing and, after writing so many books now, how long did you struggle before you got to the Left Behind novel in this series and really finding success?
Yeah, people often ask if I ever wrote anything before Left Behind, after, but Left Behind was my 125th book. That doesn't mean I was a failure before. Actually, I was quite successful because I had started in the newspaper business and then the magazine business. And so when I started writing, I frankly don't have those stories of a whole bunch of rejections and that type of thing. I knew the business, I knew what people wanted, and I had some facility as a writer and an editor. And but I didn't have gigantic breakout hits. I did a lot of sports biographies, and my background was sports writing. And I got some breaks early. My fourth book was a book with Hank Aaron. I did a book with Walter Payton, Nolan Ryan, Oral Hershiser, Joe Gibbs, Mike Singletary, people like that. And it opened a lot of doors. When I started writing fiction, my first one kind of hit, and that's fairly unusual. I'm not sure why I have the facility to write nonfiction and fiction. Most people don't. But I really fell in love with fiction, and I had done well enough. I don't want to sound falsely modest, but I really believe I'm mono-gifted. I don't sing or dance or preach. Writing is all I do. And so I felt obligated to exercise that gift. And I would have been able to pay off our house and put our kids through college. Basically, with my career, I was doing pretty well. But when Left Behind hit, it was such a phenomenon that, I mean, I've, as you said, I think you mentioned, I've written over 200 books. 16 of those, the Left Behind series, account for, I would say, at least 80% of my total sales. I mean, it's been, next month will be 30 years since the first Left Behind title came out, and it's sold in the 60 million range. And that series is still selling at about 10,000 units a month to this day. It's just unbelievable. And I can remember early on thinking I could take a little credit for that. Tyndale House sent me a presentation of the first three covers when they totaled 1 million copies. And I was thinking, really pulled something off there. Not too many people can say they've had 3 books that total 1 million copies. And then I got a call the next day from the publisher, and they said, check the sales of book 4 on Amazon. And I said, well, it hasn't released yet. It's coming out in 2 weeks. And they said, check the sales. It was number 1 on Amazon 2 weeks before it released. And it had the absolute opposite effect on me. It just slayed me. And I really was humbled. I thought, all right, no more taking credit for this. This is clearly a God thing. I'm going to just hang on for dear life, do what I'm supposed to do, and recognize who I am and who I'm not. And I think that helped when The Chosen hit for Dallas, because he was in his mid-40s when that hit, and I'd been in my mid-40s when Left Behind hit. And I was able to counsel him that, you just let the phenomenon take care of itself and stick to what you're doing. And he's done that.
And I think it's interesting. What do you think? Why do you think the Left Behind series caught on the way it did?
Well, I'd love to think it's the great writing, but I just told you why that isn't the case.
Yeah.
I really think part of it was the timing. A lot of people thought that we wrote it on purpose for the end of the millennium because for some reason people were comparing the end of the millennium to the end of time. I never thought of that, and that wasn't the point. But frankly, one of the things, I did all the writing, but it was Dr. LaHaye's idea, Dr. Tim LaHaye, and he kept me on track theologically and from a scholarly standpoint. But I remember asking him before I started, who am I writing this to? Am I writing it to believers who just will be encouraged by it? They know this story, and most of them believe this way. Or am I writing it to the uninitiated? And he said both.
Hmm.
And I tried to tell him that, a double-minded book is unstable in all its ways. But I never could get him off that. So when I started writing it, I thought, all I can do is try to do justice to this greatest story ever told, this prophetic, thing about the end times, and to Dr. LaHaye's view of the eschatology. But I think the secret was, and I'm not sure I did this on purpose either, but it just sort of came to me. I included what I consider credible, skeptical characters.
Hmm.
So not everybody who wonders what happened sees what happened and then gets saved and becomes a believer and saves themselves. The prophecy is clear that a lot of people will even see and recognize that prophecy is being fulfilled, and they'll still reject. And so there's really something there for everybody. There's the story of encouraging believers, and then there's a story for people who are saying this couldn't be of God. This is chaos. This created all this mayhem. How could he be behind this? Well, I have characters in there saying that, and they're identifying with them. And so I think that's one of the secrets. There's credible, skeptical characters that everybody could identify with.
So jumping from that now to, of course, what you've been writing alongside the Chosen series, which is so great. So this is novel 5 called Not My Will, talking about Holy Week. So what was the biggest insight that you had as you were writing this about the final days of Jesus' earthly ministry?
Well, this has really been a sort of a bizarre experience because we're doing it backwards. Mm-hmm. The Chosen, Dallas and his co-writers have based that series obviously on the Bible. Mm-hmm. So the Bible becomes the script for the TV series, and then my novels are based on the scripts and what you see on the screen. But I'm asked to bring added value and more conversation and inner monologue and even other characters if I can. But what I learned, especially from Holy Week, I think the Garden of Gethsemane is such a pivotal moment. And that's thus the title. That's where Jesus was asking if this cup could pass from him, because as a human, nobody's looking forward to being crucified and put to death and being tortured like that. And so he's saying, is there another way out? But not my will, but thine be done. And I had a really interesting experience. In fact, it was 1 year and 1 week ago. Or I should say it's next week it'll be a year. Dallas's birthday. I was down on the set in Texas, and I was remembering the day of his birth, as I do for all my kids on the day of their birth. I remember locking in those memories and looking in the mirror in the labor room and saying, don't forget a detail. And so I'm sort of verklempt watching my son work, and he's in a big sound stage that they have where they've recreated the Garden of Gethsemane with imported dirt and imported olive trees from California. They've got torches on the wall because he likes to use that realistic lighting, not phony lighting. And I'm just thrilled watching. And he said, Dad, would you like to stand behind me while I direct this scene? And of course, I jumped at the chance, and I knew my place. I'm to be quiet and just watch. And I didn't realize, but it's an invented scene. It's not from the Bible, but it's a plausible scene about where Joseph, Jesus' earthly father, appears to him and encourages him and says, I'll be waiting for you. I mean, here I am thinking of my own son's birth, watching a father-son scene being portrayed, and my own son is directing it. I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from whimpering out loud on mic. And I remember at the end of it, all I could do was embrace him. And he said, I forgot you were a blubberer. Thanks for keeping it together. But that was such a powerful scene and such a great memory. And we're going back down in a week for Dallas's 50th birthday. So he doesn't know that. So hopefully he won't watch this.
It's okay. This will air after the birthday. So happy birthday. That's an incredible, wow, what an incredible legacy that he's leaving and you are leaving as well. Let's talk about this too. What is one character, as you were fleshing out the Holy Week, what's one character that you say I'm most related to?
Well, I think a lot of people will agree on this. It's so easy to relate to Simon Peter because he's such a mercurial character, so devout. He wants to be devout. He wants to follow, and he pledges his loyalty to Jesus and says, I'll never betray you and I'll never do anything. And Jesus tells him, yes, you will. And he does. And even in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's going to stand with Jesus. While Jesus is off praying, he's going to be praying with his friends there. And he falls asleep 3 times there. And that's me. I mean, I can't identify with Jesus. He's perfect. And so often when you see Jesus on screen, whether it's a film or a TV series, he's so ethereal, and he speaks in King James English, and almost has a halo and a glow. And I love how Dallas and his co-writers have portrayed him as a real person, a real human who has fun and has a sense of humor and camaraderie and that type of thing. But that's about all I can get as far as identifying. But I can really identify with these disciples. They're small, they're petty, they're jealous, they're backsliders. And especially Peter, he's the guy I identify with. I'm the one who would fall asleep in the garden and pledge my loyalty and then be scared to death when somebody confronts me. So he's my guy.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more question for you. You've written more than 200 books. And as a fellow creative, this is my struggle, and I would love to see how you do it. How do you go from the highest of highs, especially with your Left Behind series, and then just how well these books are doing too, and then have to start over with a blank slate? How have you done that 200 times?
Sometimes I don't know. And I teach writers online, and they're always surprised to hear me say, despite all this stuff I've done and accomplished in the world's eyes, I'm the king of procrastinators. I hate starting. And it's funny, while I'm writing, because I'm a creative, I'm thinking of other ideas, and the new shiny one always looks the best. Mm-hmm. I wish I could stop this. People say, which is your favorite, fiction or nonfiction? It's whatever I'm not writing at the time. That's the one that looks so attractive to me. But I just make a note and put it aside, because I realize if I don't finish what I'm doing, nothing gets done, because there's too many ideas. But starting, one thing I do is I keep my deadlines sacrosanct. So I actually schedule procrastination days, because I know I'm going to procrastinate. But when I get to the point where I realize, all right, now I'm down to where I need to write this many pages per day to make the deadline, I know my capacity. And when I get there, I say, all right, it's time to stop fooling around and get to work. My wife has a little plaque for me that she gave me. It's a paperweight that says, the only way to write a book is with butt in chair. So we can say seat in chair if you need to, but that's what it says, and that's what I have to do.
His success started with public failure, and Christian artist Austin French shares his journey. Coming up next week on Manly with Andy.